They say you don't know what you have until it's gone. For me, that realization hit while I was sitting on a freezing bench outside a 24-hour diner with nothing but the clothes on my back. No money, no house, not even a coat to keep me warm. The night before, my wife, Lisa, 34, had thrown me out of the house I worked my entire life to pay for. She claimed I had pushed her too far. At first, I thought it was just another argument blown out of proportion. But when I found out the truth, the man she'd replaced me with, it felt like the world had been pulled out from under me. Her betrayal wasn't just a stab in the back. It was a calculated act that destroyed everything I thought I knew. It all started with someone I never would have suspected, our son's math and physics teacher. The day she threw me out started like any other. I woke up early, got our son, Dylan, 10M, ready for school, and headed off to my job as a manager at a logistics company. Lisa had been distant lately, but I chalked it up to stress. Between raising Dylan and juggling her part-time work as a graphic designer, I figured she just needed space. That evening, I came home expecting the usual routine: dinner, helping Dylan with his homework, and then collapsing on the couch. Instead, I walked into chaos. My clothes were in garbage bags by the front door, and Lisa was pacing the living room, her face red with anger. "What's going on?" I asked, stunned. "I can't do this anymore, Alex," she snapped, pointing toward the door. "I want you out." "Out," I said, my voice rising. "Lisa, what the hell are you talking about? This is my house too." "Not anymore," she said coldly. "I filed for divorce. I've had enough of you controlling everything." Her words hit like a slap. "Controlling? What are you talking about? We barely argue." She ignored me, shoving a pile of papers into my chest. "I've already started the process. You can sign them or not. I don't care, but I want you gone tonight." I stood there in disbelief, the world spinning around me. Dylan peeked out from the hallway, his eyes wide with confusion. "Dylan," Lisa said sharply, "go to your room." He hesitated, looking at me for reassurance, but I was too stunned to say anything. He disappeared down the hall as Lisa pushed me toward the door. "You can't just do this," I said, my voice breaking. "We have a life together, a family." "Not anymore," she said, slamming the door in my face. I spent that night on a park bench, shivering in the cold. I didn't have my wallet, my keys, or even my phone. She'd locked me out of everything. For hours, I sat there, trying to piece together how it had come to this. Lisa and I weren't perfect, but we weren't falling apart either, or so I'd thought. The next day, I borrowed a phone from a stranger and called my boss to explain the situation. He was understanding enough to let me take a few days off, but that didn't solve the bigger problem. I had nowhere to go, no resources, and no idea what had caused my wife to blow up our marriage overnight. I didn't realize it then, but the truth was far worse than I could have imagined. After spending the night on that freezing park bench, I decided to head back to the house in the morning. I needed answers. When I arrived, I was met with locked doors and silence. No one answered the bell. I knocked until my knuckles hurt, but it was clear Lisa had no intention of letting me in. I sat on the steps, feeling defeated, until Dylan's school bus pulled up at the corner. I stood, waving to get his attention as he walked up the street. "Dad," he said, confused. "Why are you out here?" I crouched to his level, forcing a smile. "Your mom and I are figuring some things out," I said. "How was school?" "Fine," he said, glancing nervously toward the house. "But Mom said you're not supposed to be here." Hearing those words from my son felt like a gut punch. "I just wanted to see you, buddy," I said softly. "Hey, go inside and do your homework, okay? We'll talk soon." Dylan nodded, giving me a quick hug before heading inside. I stayed on the steps for a while, trying to think of my next move, when I noticed something odd. Parked down the street was a black sedan I didn't recognize. It looked too clean, too new to belong to anyone in our neighborhood. I wouldn't have thought much of it if not for the way the driver was watching me. When I started walking toward it, the car pulled away. That night, I crashed on a friend's couch. He let me borrow his phone to call Lisa, but she didn't answer. Frustrated, I opened my email, hoping to find some clarity, and that's when I saw it. An automated notification from Dylan's school. It was a simple update about parent-teacher conferences, but the name of the sender caught my attention. Michael Hayes. Mr. Hayes was Dylan's math and physics teacher. He was new this year, young, fresh out of college. I'd met him briefly during the first open house, and he seemed friendly enough. But now his name felt oddly significant. Something about the way Dylan had acted earlier, paired with the mysterious car outside the house, made me feel like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I stared at the email for a long time before making a decision. I needed to dig deeper. The next morning, I borrowed my friend's laptop and started searching. It didn't take long to find Michael Hayes on social media. His profiles were locked down, but his profile picture showed him grinning next to a dog, with Lisa's name tagged in the comments. My stomach churned. I clicked on the tag, and sure enough, it led to Lisa's page. Her latest post was a smiling photo of her and Dylan at a park, with the caption, "Family time, 2 hearts." But it wasn't just the photo that caught my attention, it was the comments. Michael had written, "Such a great day, smiling face with smiling eyes, can't wait for next time." Her reply, "Neither can we, red heart." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. Was it possible? Could Lisa be having an affair with our son's teacher? I didn't have proof yet, but the pieces were starting to come together. The possibility that Lisa was involved with Michael Hayes consumed my thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying the way she'd so coldly kicked me out, the way Dylan had been unusually quiet when I saw him, and now this. Flirty comments on social media that felt far too familiar for a casual acquaintance. I decided to confront her. That evening, I borrowed my friend's car and drove back to the house. It was around 7 p.m., and the lights were on inside. I parked down the street and walked up to the house, trying to stay calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. When I knocked, it took a minute for the door to open. Lisa stood there, her face hardening the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here, Alex?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I want to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I deserve some answers, Lisa. You can't just throw me out without telling me why." "I already told you," she said. "We're done. There's nothing left to say." "Don't give me that," I snapped. "Who is Michael Hayes to you?" Her eyes widened for a split second before narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, stepping closer. "I've seen the comments, Lisa. You've been tagging each other like it's no big deal. He's our son's teacher, for God's sake." She glared at me, her jaw tightening. "You're paranoid, Alex. Michael is just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated bitterly. "Since when do friends leave comments with heart emojis? Since when do friends drive mysterious black cars that park down the street?" Lisa froze, her face paling. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. "You didn't think I'd notice, did you?" I said, my voice rising. "You thought you could sneak around, and I'd be too stupid to figure it out." "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. "Why?" I shot back. "Is he here right now?" Her silence spoke volumes. I pushed past her into the house, my blood boiling. "Michael!" I yelled, storming through the living room. "If you're here, come out!" "Alex, stop it!" Lisa said, grabbing my arm. I shook her off, heading toward the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet, but I felt certain someone else was there. When I reached the back door, I noticed it was unlocked. I stepped outside and scanned the yard, but it was empty. If Michael had been there, he was gone now. I turned back to Lisa, who was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed defensively. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to Dylan?" I said, my voice breaking. "How do you think he's going to feel when he finds out his mom is cheating on his dad with his teacher?" Lisa's face twisted with anger. "Don't you dare bring Dylan into this," she snapped. "You've always been more concerned about your pride than this family." "My pride?" I said, laughing bitterly. "You're the one who's destroyed this family, Lisa. Not me." She didn't respond, and I realized there was nothing more to say. I walked out of the house, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and despair. If I wanted the full truth, I would have to find it myself. After storming out of the house, I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Lisa's reaction had confirmed my suspicions, but I still didn't have proof. Part of me wanted to believe I was wrong, that I was jumping to conclusions out of anger and pain. But another part of me, the part that couldn't forget her expression when I mentioned Michael's name, knew I wasn't. I parked the car at a quiet overlook and sat there, staring out at the city lights. I couldn't go back to my friend's place without a plan, without some idea of how to confront this mess. I pulled out my phone and opened Dylan's school portal. I knew it was a long shot, but I started searching for anything that might connect Michael Hayes to Lisa. Most of it was mundane, emails about assignments, parent-teacher conferences, and school events. But then I noticed something odd. There was a message from Michael sent directly to Lisa, not through the portal, but forwarded to her personal email. Looking forward to our next session. Let's make it special. Smiling face with smiling eyes. My stomach twisted. Session? I stared at the email for what felt like forever. The tone was unmistakable. This wasn't about Dylan. The next morning, I decided to visit the school. I told myself it was to check on Dylan, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the full story. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Hayes," I said, keeping my tone even. She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "It's about my son, Dylan," I said. "It won't take long." Reluctantly, she paged him. Michael appeared a few minutes later, looking every bit the charming young teacher he presented himself as. He extended a hand, his smile practiced and polite. "Mr. Carter," he said, "how can I help you?" I ignored his hand, folding my arms across my chest. "Can we talk privately?" His smile faltered slightly, but he gestured toward an empty classroom. Once inside, I shut the door and turned to face him. "How long have you been seeing my wife?" Michael's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Or maybe he was just a good actor. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said coldly. "Don't play dumb. I've seen the messages, the social media comments. I know what's going on." He held up his hands defensively. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Lisa and I are friends, but that's it." "Friends?" I repeated bitterly. "Friends who have special sessions together?" His expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I don't know what you think you know," he said carefully, "but this isn't the place to discuss it. If you have a problem, take it up with Lisa." I stepped closer, my fists clenching. "You're messing with my family," I said through gritted teeth. "Stay away from her, or I'll make sure everyone at this school knows what kind of man you really are." Michael's face hardened, but he didn't respond. I walked out of the classroom, my blood boiling. That night, I sat in my friend's living room, replaying the confrontation in my head. I had pushed Michael, but I still didn't have concrete proof, just his defensive reaction and Lisa's evasiveness. If I wanted to expose the truth, I needed more. Determined to find the proof I needed, I started keeping track of Lisa's behavior. I knew it was a long shot. I didn't have access to her phone or her social media anymore, but I couldn't let this go. My break came a few days later when Rebecca, Lisa's sister, called me out of the blue. "Alex, I wasn't sure if I should call you," she began hesitantly, "but I think you deserve to know what's going on." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" She let out a sigh. "Lisa's been spending a lot of time with someone. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the last time I saw her, she mentioned Michael Hayes. She said they've been meeting outside of school." I gripped the phone tightly. "What did she say about him?" "She said he's been helping her with some personal growth, whatever that means," Rebecca said, her tone skeptical. "But honestly, Alex, it didn't sit right with me. The way she talked about him, it sounded like more than just a professional relationship." Rebecca's words confirmed what I already suspected. Lisa wasn't just sneaking around. She was justifying it to the people closest to her, spinning it as something harmless. "Thank you, Rebecca," I said. "I appreciate you telling me." After hanging up, I sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I needed a way to expose whatever was going on, and I needed it soon. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following evening, I drove past our house, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lisa's activities. Sure enough, the same black sedan was parked in the driveway. I parked a block away and waited, watching as the lights inside the house flickered on and off. About an hour later, the front door opened, and Michael stepped out. I clenched the steering wheel, my heart racing as he casually walked to his car and drove off. I followed him. Michael drove to a nearby cafe, parking in the back lot. I watched as he walked inside, checking his phone. A few minutes later, Lisa arrived, glancing around nervously before heading in. My stomach churned as I watched them sit down together, leaning close as they talked. I grabbed my phone, snapping a few photos from the car. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was something. As I sat there, watching them laugh and whisper like teenagers, I realized just how deep Lisa's betrayal went. She wasn't just having an affair. She was doing it openly, without fear of getting caught. The rage I felt was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't confront them here. I needed to be smart, to gather enough evidence to protect myself in the divorce proceedings. That night, I sent the photos to my lawyer. "This changes everything," he said after seeing them. "If we can establish that Lisa is having an affair, It could drastically impact the settlement. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a glimmer of control. But little did I know, the situation was about to take an even darker turn. The photos of Lisa and Michael at the cafe felt like a breakthrough, but they also stirred a storm of emotions I wasn't ready to face. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was humiliation, sadness, and the crushing realization that Lisa didn't seem to care how her actions were affecting Dylan or me. My lawyer had assured me the photos were enough to challenge her divorce terms. But deep down, I wanted something more: closure, an explanation, or at least a moment where Lisa would acknowledge the pain she'd caused. That opportunity came unexpectedly. 2 nights later, I got a call from Rebecca. "Alex, you need to come to Mom and Dad's," she said, her voice tense. "Lisa's here, and she's saying some really strange things." "What do you mean, strange?" I asked, sitting up. "She's talking about how Michael understands her in ways you never could," Rebecca said. "She's practically bragging about how he's helped her find herself. It's unsettling." I clenched my jaw. "I'm on my way." When I arrived, Lisa was sitting in the living room, casually sipping tea as if everything was fine. Rebecca stood nearby, her expression tight with concern. "Alex," Lisa said, glancing up at me. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. "About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "About Michael," I said bluntly, "and how you've been sneaking around with him while destroying our family." Rebecca's eyes widened, but Lisa didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coolly. "Cut the crap, Lisa," I snapped. "I followed you. I saw you with him at the cafe. I have photos." Her expression faltered for a split second before she recovered. "So what if I was with him?" she said, her tone defiant. "Michael is a good man. He listens to me, supports me. Things you never did." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "You're seriously justifying this?" I said, my voice rising. "You cheated on me with our son's teacher, and you think that's okay because he listens to you?" "You pushed me to this," she said, her voice cold. "You were always too busy with work, too distracted to notice what I needed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't my fault, Lisa. You made a choice. You destroyed our marriage, not me." "Maybe it needed to be destroyed," she said quietly, looking away. Her words left me speechless. That night, I sat in my car outside Rebecca's house, staring at the dashboard. Lisa's lack of remorse, her ability to twist everything into being my fault, left me more broken than I'd felt in weeks. But as I replayed her words, another realization began to sink in. Lisa wasn't just reckless. She was dangerous. Her willingness to rewrite the narrative, to frame herself as the victim while tearing down everything we'd built, made me question how far she'd go to get what she wanted. And for the first time, I began to wonder if Michael was more than just an affair. The next day, I reached out to a private investigator my lawyer had recommended. "If Lisa and Michael are hiding something bigger, I need to know," I said. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, nodded. "We'll get to the bottom of it. These situations are rarely as simple as they seem." She promised to start digging immediately, and I left her office with a mix of dread and anticipation. I had no idea what Karen would uncover, but I knew one thing for certain. Lisa's betrayal was only the beginning. A week later, Karen called. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach drop. "I found something," she said. "You're going to want to hear this in person." We met at her office, where she laid out a folder on the desk in front of me. "I looked into Michael Hayes," she began, "and let's just say he's not the squeaky clean teacher he pretends to be." Karen flipped open the folder, revealing a series of documents, background checks, employment records, and what looked like a police report. "Michael has a history of getting too close to his students' families," Karen explained. "This isn't the first time he's been involved in inappropriate relationships." My stomach churned as she continued. "He worked at 2 other schools before coming to Dylan's. Both times, he left under suspicious circumstances. In one case, a parent accused him of having an affair with their spouse, but it was swept under the rug due to lack of evidence." I stared at the documents, my anger boiling over. How is he still allowed to teach? Karen shrugged. "There's no criminal record, just a string of rumors and complaints. But that's not all." She slid another document across the table, a bank statement. "This is Lisa's account," Karen said. "Notice anything unusual?" At first glance, it seemed normal, but then I noticed a series of withdrawals, large ones starting a few months ago. $10,000. I said, my voice rising. What the hell is this? That's what I asked myself, Karen said. So I dug deeper. Turns out Michael recently put down a deposit on a new condo downtown. The timing lines up perfectly with these withdrawals. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Lisa wasn't just cheating on me. She was financially supporting Michael. That evening, I sat in my car, staring at the copies of the documents Karen had given me. The betrayal felt even deeper now. Lisa wasn't just destroying our marriage. She was draining our resources to fund her new life with Michael. I thought about Dylan, about how all of this would impact him. Lisa's recklessness wasn't just hurting me. It was putting our son's future at risk. I knew I couldn't sit idly by any longer. The next morning, I called my lawyer and forwarded everything Karen had uncovered. This changes everything, he said firmly. With this evidence, we can push for a custody hearing and challenge Lisa's financial claims. If she's been using joint funds to support an affair, the court won't look kindly on that. His words gave me a renewed sense of purpose. For months, I'd felt like a victim, powerless against Lisa's manipulations. But now, I had something tangible, a way to fight back. That afternoon, I got another call from Karen. I did some more digging, she said. And there's something else you should know. My chest tightened. What is it? Michael doesn't just have a history of affairs, she said. He's also been known to manipulate his partners into financial schemes. In one case, he convinced a woman to co-sign a loan for him, then disappeared once the money was secured. My hands clenched into fists as she spoke. Alex, Karen said gently, you need to be prepared. Michael is dangerous, and Lisa might not see it until it's too late. Her warning echoed in my mind as I hung up. Lisa's actions had already turned my life upside down. But now, the stakes felt even higher. Karen's findings replayed in my mind, each new piece of information cutting deeper than the last. Lisa wasn't just betraying me with Michael. She was actively jeopardizing our son's future and possibly her own safety. I couldn't let this go on any longer. That evening, I drove to the house, determined to confront her. When I arrived, the black sedan was parked in the driveway again. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I stared at it, fury and dread coiling in my chest. I stepped out of the car and knocked on the door. This time, Lisa answered almost immediately, her face tightening when she saw me. What are you doing here? She asked sharply. We need to talk, I said, pushing past her into the living room. Lisa sighed, crossing her arms. I don't have time for this, Alex. Make time, I snapped. Because I know everything, Lisa. I know about the withdrawals, the condo, Michael's past. All of it. Her eyes flickered with something. Shock, guilt, maybe even fear, but she quickly masked it with anger. You had me followed? She demanded. You're damn right I did, I said, stepping closer. You've been lying to me, stealing from our family to fund your little fantasy with Michael. Did you even stop to think about what this would do to Dylan? Don't bring Dylan into this, she said defensively. He's already in it, Lisa, I shouted. You're dragging him into this mess, whether you realize it or not. And for what? A guy who's using you for your money. Her face paled. That's not true, she said weakly. It is true, I said, throwing Karen's evidence onto the coffee table. Michael has a history of this. He's done it before, and he's doing it again with you. Lisa stared at the papers, her expression crumbling. I don't believe you, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. You're in denial, I said, my tone softening despite my anger. I don't know what he's told you, but you need to wake up, Lisa. He's not who you think he is. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. He said he needed help getting on his feet, she muttered. That the condo was an investment for us. I shook my head. It's not for you, Lisa. It's for him. And once he gets what he wants, he's going to leave you, just like he's left everyone else. Her silence was deafening. As I stood there, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Michael standing in the doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes cold. What's going on here? He asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. This doesn't involve you, I said, stepping toward him. Actually, it does, he said, smirking. Lisa and I are together now, Alex. You need to accept that. She's not your ATM, I said coldly. And I'm not letting you ruin her life or my son's future. Michael's smirk faltered, and I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Lisa, he said, turning to her, you don't have to listen to this. He's just trying to scare you. But Lisa didn't respond. She was still staring at the papers, her face pale. Lisa, I said gently, you need to see him for who he really is. He's using you. And if you don't stop this now, it's going to destroy everything. Her hands trembled as she set the papers down, tears streaming down her face. Michael, she said, her voice breaking, is it true? Are you just using me? Michael's expression darkened. Don't listen to him, Lisa. He's bitter and jealous. You know that. Answer the question, she demanded, her voice rising. For a moment, Michael said nothing. Then he turned and walked out of the house without another word. Lisa broke down, sobbing into her hands as the weight of everything crashed down on her. That night, I stayed on the couch, not out of sympathy for Lisa, but for Dylan's sake. He needed at least one stable parent in the chaos Lisa had created. As I sat in the quiet living room, I realized this was far from over. Lisa's actions had consequences, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. The house was silent when I woke the next morning. Dylan was still asleep, and Lisa hadn't come out of her room since her breakdown the night before. I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to figure out my next move. Lisa was unraveling, and Michael had shown his true colors. But even as I felt a small measure of vindication, I knew this wasn't the end. There were still legal battles to fight, custody to consider, and the emotional scars Dylan would inevitably carry. Lisa finally emerged, her face pale and puffy from crying. She glanced at me before sitting down at the table, avoiding eye contact. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I set down my mug, unsure how to respond. For what? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. For cheating? For stealing from our family? For putting our son's future at risk? Her eyes filled with tears again. For all of it, she whispered. I made a mess of everything. I wanted to yell at her, to unleash the full force of my anger and frustration. But seeing her so broken, so unlike the woman I thought I knew, drained the fight out of me. It's not just about me, Lisa, I said finally. You need to take responsibility, not just for what you did to me, but for what you did to Dylan. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll fix it, she said. I don't know how, but I'll fix it. I didn't believe her, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Later that day, I got a call from Karen, the private investigator. You're not going to believe this, she said. Michael just skipped town. What? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. He packed up and left last night, she said. No forwarding address, no explanation. He's gone. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Michael's disappearance wasn't just an escape. It was an admission of guilt. Karen sighed. This isn't uncommon with guys like him. They move from place to place, leaving chaos in their wake. But at least now, you have a stronger case against Lisa in court. Her words gave me some comfort, but they also left me feeling hollow. Michael might have been out of the picture, but the damage he caused was still very real. That evening, I sat down with Dylan, determined to give him some sense of stability. Hey, bud, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. Can we talk? He looked up from his tablet, his big brown eyes filled with worry. Is it about Mom? He asked softly. I nodded, my chest tightening. Yeah, it is. I know things have been confusing lately, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm always going to be here for you. He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I just want things to go back to normal. I pulled him into a hug, my heart breaking for him. I know, buddy, I said, and I promise, I'm going to do everything I can to make things better. The conversation with Dylan strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting him and giving him a future he could rely on. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him to push for full custody. Lisa had proven she couldn't be trusted, and I wasn't going to let her drag Dylan through her chaos any longer. When I told my lawyer to push for full custody, I knew it would be a fight. Lisa wasn't the type to back down easily, even if she knew she was in the wrong. The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I focused on building my case. With Karen's help, I gathered all the evidence of Lisa's reckless behavior. The financial withdrawals from Michael, her blatant disregard for Dylan's stability, and even the photos of her and Michael at the cafe. It wasn't just about proving her unfit as a parent. It was about protecting Dylan from the chaos she had brought into our lives. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom feeling a mix of dread and determination. Lisa was already there, sitting at the table with her lawyer. She looked nervous but defiant, avoiding my gaze. As the hearing began, my lawyer laid out our case, presenting the evidence we'd gathered. Mr. Carter has demonstrated a consistent commitment to his son's well-being, my lawyer said firmly. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carter has engaged in reckless financial behavior, jeopardizing the family's stability, and has failed to prioritize her son's needs. Lisa's lawyer tried to downplay the evidence, arguing that her actions were the result of emotional distress during the breakdown of the marriage. But when the judge saw the bank records and the photos of Michael, it was clear Lisa's case was crumbling. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Carter, do you have any response to these allegations?" Lisa hesitated, her hands trembling. "I made mistakes," she said quietly. "But I love my son, and I don't want to lose him." Her voice broke, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered everything she had done, how she had betrayed me, endangered Dylan's future, and refused to take responsibility until she was cornered. After hours of arguments and testimony, the judge finally delivered her decision. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that primary custody should be awarded to Mr. Carter," she said. "Mrs. Carter will retain visitation rights, contingent upon her compliance with court-ordered counseling and financial oversight." The relief was overwhelming. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a chance to give Dylan the stability he deserved. Lisa, on the other hand, looked devastated. As much as I wanted to feel vindicated, all I could think about was Dylan and how this would affect him. That evening, I picked Dylan up from school and took him to the park. We sat on a bench, watching the ducks in the pond as I explained the situation. "You're going to live with me full-time now," I said gently. "But you'll still get to see Mom. This doesn't change how much we both love you." He nodded slowly, processing the news. "Is it because of Mr. Hayes?" he asked, his voice small. I froze, my heart sinking. "What do you mean?" "I heard Mom talking to him on the phone," Dylan said. "She was crying, and he said she didn't need you anymore." His words sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You don't need to worry about Mr. Hayes," I said. "He's not going to be around anymore." Dylan nodded, leaning against me. "I just want things to be okay again." I hugged him tightly. "They will be," I promised. That night, as I tucked Dylan into bed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken the first step toward rebuilding our lives. Winning custody of Dylan felt like a small victory in the midst of a storm. For the first time in months, I could breathe a little easier knowing he was safe and away from Lisa's chaos. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized how much work lay ahead. Dylan had questions I couldn't fully answer, scars from the upheaval that weren't visible but were undeniably there. I did everything I could to make him feel stable again. I rearranged my schedule at work to pick him up from school every day, helped him with his homework, and made sure we had dinner together every night. It was exhausting but worth it to see him start to smile again. One evening, as we were playing a board game, Dylan asked a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Dad, do you still love Mom?" I set down the dice, unsure how to respond. "Why do you ask that, bud?" He shrugged, looking down at the game pieces. I miss when we were all together." His words hit me hard. I missed it too, the simplicity of being a family, the sense of security I'd taken for granted. But I couldn't lie to him. "I'll always care about your mom because she's your mom," I said carefully. "But sometimes people hurt each other in ways they can't fix. That doesn't mean we don't both love you, though." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't fully satisfied with the answer. That night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, and lazy Sundays. It was bittersweet, remembering the good times before everything fell apart. I wondered if Lisa ever thought about those moments, or if she was too caught up in her own world to care. The next morning, Lisa called. "I need to see Dylan," she said, her voice shaky. "You'll have to schedule through the court," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I just want to talk to him, Alex," she said. "Please. He needs to know I'm still here for him." Her words sparked a flare of anger, but I kept it in check. "He knows," I said. "But this isn't about what you want, Lisa. It's about what's best for him." There was a long silence before she responded. "I'm trying to get better," she said quietly. "I'm going to counseling." "I'm not," I'm not with Michael anymore. That's a start, I said, though I didn't fully believe her. She hung up shortly after, and I couldn't help but wonder if her remorse was genuine or just another act. The next week, Dylan and I went to his school's fall festival. It was the first time I'd been back since everything with Michael came to light. The tension in the air was palpable, with some of the other parents casting knowing glances my way. One parent, a friend of Lisa's named Carla, approached me near the snack table. I heard about what happened, she said, lowering her voice. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry, Alex. You didn't deserve any of this. Thanks, I said, unsure how to respond. Carla hesitated before adding, You're not the first family he's done this to, you know. Michael, there was another mom last year. It was a mess. I nodded, already aware of Karen's findings. But hearing it confirmed by someone at the school made it feel even more real. That night, as I tucked Dylan into bed, I felt a sense of resolve. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could make sure we moved forward. For Dylan's sake, I had to stay strong, even if part of me still felt broken. Life slowly began to settle into a rhythm. Dylan adjusted to living with me full-time, and I threw myself into work to provide for us. The custody victory felt like a win, but the scars from Lisa's betrayal lingered. Then, out of nowhere, Lisa called again. Alex, she began cautiously, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I've been doing a lot of thinking. I need to talk to you in person. Her tone was softer than I expected, less defensive, almost vulnerable. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral spot, a quiet cafe not far from my apartment. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, nervously stirring a cup of tea. She looked tired, as though the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. Thanks for coming, she said, motioning for me to sit. I'm here for Dylan's sake, I replied curtly, crossing my arms. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I deserve that, she admitted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed deeply. I've been going to counseling, she said, and I've been trying to understand why I did what I did, why I threw away everything that mattered. Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected this level of self-awareness from her, let alone an apology. I hurt you, Alex, she continued, her voice trembling. I hurt Dylan, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I didn't know what to say. The anger I'd been carrying for months was still there, but so was something else, an unexpected twinge of pity. Why are you telling me this now? I asked cautiously. She took a deep breath. Because I want to fix things. Not with us. I know that's not possible. But with Dylan. I want to be better for him. Her sincerity felt genuine, but I couldn't ignore the damage she'd already done. It's going to take more than words, Lisa, I said. Dylan deserves stability, and you haven't exactly shown you can provide that. I know, she said quickly. That's why I want to propose something. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. I think you should stay the primary parent, she said, her voice shaky. At least for now. But I want to earn back your trust. And his. Her offer stunned me. After months of fighting for control, Lisa was finally acknowledging her mistakes. Over the next few weeks, Lisa began making small efforts to rebuild her relationship with Dylan. She stuck to the visitation schedule, showed up on time, and even started helping with his homework during their visits. I remained cautious, wary of her intentions, but Dylan seemed happier. He smiled more, laughed more, and talked about his time with Lisa in a way that reassured me. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Dylan asked, Do you think Mom is different now? I hesitated, unsure how to answer. I think she's trying, I said carefully. But it's going to take time. Dylan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I just want her to be happy, he said quietly. His words hit me hard. Despite everything, he still loved his mom, and deep down, so did I. Not in the way I once had, but in the sense that she was Dylan's mother, and that bond would always matter. The progress Lisa was making didn't erase the past, but it gave me hope that Dylan might have a chance at a stable, happy future. Lisa's efforts to rebuild her relationship with Dylan were consistent, if cautious. She stuck to the court-ordered visitation schedule, showed genuine interest in his schoolwork and hobbies, and even began attending his soccer games. For the first time since the chaos started, it felt like there was a sense of normalcy. Dylan seemed lighter, more at ease, and for that, I was grateful. But as much as I wanted to believe Lisa had turned a corner, I couldn't shake the nagging doubt that this peace was fragile. I'd seen how quickly she could unravel, and the wounds of her betrayal were still too fresh for me to fully trust her intentions. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to meet her at the park where Dylan's soccer team was playing. I arrived early, standing off to the side with a coffee in hand as I watched Dylan run drills with his teammates. Lisa showed up a few minutes later, waving at me as she walked over. "Hi," she said, her tone unusually tentative. "Hi," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us watching Dylan. "He's getting better," Lisa said, breaking the quiet. "He's been practicing a lot," I said. She nodded, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally, "for letting me be a part of his life again. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying." Her words felt sincere, but they also made me uneasy. Lisa had always been good at saying the right things, but actions mattered more than words. "I'm doing this for Dylan," I said simply. "I know," she said, her voice soft, "and I'm grateful." Later that evening, after Dylan had gone to bed, I found myself replaying the conversation in my head. Lisa's demeanor had changed. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't ignore the voice in my head telling me to stay on guard. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Rebecca. "Hey, Alex. Just wanted to let you know I talked to Lisa earlier. She mentioned something about wanting to move closer to you and Dylan. Have you heard anything about that?" The message made my stomach twist. Lisa hadn't said anything to me about moving, and the idea of her being physically closer brought back memories of her manipulations. I texted Rebecca back. "She hasn't said anything to me. Did she say why?" Rebecca's reply came quickly. She just said she wanted to be more involved. I thought it sounded odd. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" The next morning, I called my lawyer to discuss the situation. "She's technically within her rights to move closer," he said, "but if her behavior starts to interfere with Dylan's stability, we can revisit the custody agreement." His words were reassuring, but they didn't ease my unease. Lisa's recent progress had been encouraging, but the idea of her trying to reclaim control over our lives sent a chill down my spine. That week, I decided to sit down with Dylan and have an honest conversation. "Hey, buddy," I said one evening as we worked on a puzzle together. "How are things with Mom?" He shrugged, fitting a piece in a place. "She's nice now. She doesn't yell as much." "That's good," I said. "Do you think she's happy?" Dylan hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think so, but sometimes she looks really sad when she thinks I'm not watching." His words tugged at my heart. As much as I resented Lisa for what she'd done, I didn't want her to be miserable, if only for Dylan's sake. "Thanks for telling me, bud," I said, ruffling his hair. "I'm proud of you for being so strong through all of this." That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something important. The fragile peace between Lisa and me wasn't just about our ability to co-parent. It was about giving Dylan the chance to heal, even if it meant navigating the complicated emotions that came with Lisa's involvement. But deep down, I knew this peace might not last forever. Lisa's attempts to rebuild her life and reconnect with Dylan seemed steady, even genuine, but the unease I felt lingered. Every step forward came with a nagging fear that she might revert to her old ways. The turning point came one afternoon when I received a call from Karen, the private investigator. "Alex," she said, her tone serious. "I was doing a routine follow-up on Michael Hayes. You need to know this. He's back." My blood ran cold. "Back? What do you mean?" "He's returned to town," Karen said. "It looks like he's been staying with a friend. I thought you should know, given everything that's happened." Hearing Michael's name was like reopening an old wound. After everything Lisa had been through, after the mess he had left behind, the thought of him re-entering her life was infuriating. "Do you think he's been in contact with Lisa?" I asked, my voice tight. "I can't say for sure," Karen replied, "but it's a possibility." I hung up and sat in silence, my mind racing. Lisa had claimed she was done with Michael, but could she be hiding something again? That evening, I called Lisa. "Michael's back," I said bluntly as soon as she answered. There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked, her voice tinged with something I couldn't place, fear, guilt, or both. "Don't play dumb, Lisa," I snapped. "He's back in town, and I need to know if you've been talking to him." "I haven't," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Why would I?" "I told you. I'm done with him." "Then why do you sound so nervous?" I pressed. "I'm not nervous," she said, her voice rising defensively. "You're the one who's always looking for something to accuse me of." Her reaction only made me more suspicious, but I decided to let it go, for now. A few days later, I picked Dylan up from school and noticed he seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay, bud?" I asked as we drove home. He shrugged, staring out the window. "Mom was acting weird yesterday," he said. "Weird how?" "She was on the phone a lot," he said. "And she kept saying stuff like, 'I don't know if this is a good idea.'" My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Did she say who she was talking to?" "No," Dylan said. "But she sounded upset." His words confirmed what I had feared. Lisa was hiding something again. That night, I decided to call Karen and ask for one more favor. "Can you see if Lisa's had any contact with Michael recently?" I asked. Karen agreed, and 2 days later, she called back with an update. "She's been meeting with him," Karen said, her voice grim. "They've met at least twice in the past week." I got photos. I clenched my fists as she described the meetings. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, not just because Lisa had lied, but because she was risking everything. Our fragile peace, Dylan's stability, for a man who had already destroyed her life once. The next time I saw Lisa, I didn't hold back. "You lied to me," I said as soon as she arrived to pick up Dylan for her visitation. She froze, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" "Michael," I said, my voice cold. "You've been meeting with him. Don't bother denying it. I've seen the proof." Her expression crumbled, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell the truth. But then she straightened, her eyes flashing with defiance. "It's not what you think," she said. "He reached out to apologize. That's all." "Apologize?" I repeated bitterly. "Do you really expect me to believe that? After everything he's done?" "I'm not seeing him like that," she insisted. I thought he deserved a chance to explain himself." "You thought he deserved a chance?" I snapped. "What about Dylan? What about me? Do we not deserve to feel safe, to know you're not going to drag us back into his mess?" Lisa didn't respond, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted you to put Dylan first," I said, my voice breaking. "But all you've done is prove, over and over, that you can't be trusted." That night, I called my lawyer again. "I want to restrict Lisa's visitation," I said firmly. With Michael back in the picture, I couldn't take any chances. Lisa had already shown she was willing to risk Dylan's well-being for her own selfish reasons, and I wasn't about to let her undo all the progress we'd made. Restricting Lisa's visitation wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. My lawyer filed an emergency motion, citing her renewed involvement with Michael as evidence of her inability to prioritize Dylan's safety and stability. When the court hearing arrived, Lisa looked worn down. She sat across the room, her head low, as my lawyer presented the evidence. Photos of her meetings with Michael, Karen's report on his past behavior, and Dylan's recent statements about her erratic behavior. The judge listened carefully, his expression neutral but stern. When Lisa was asked to explain herself, her voice broke as she tried to defend her actions. "I made a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, I thought I could fix things." Her words felt hollow, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of something real, regret. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and restricting Lisa's visitation to supervised sessions until she completed additional counseling. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a bittersweet sense of closure. Over the following weeks, Dylan and I settled into a new normal. With Lisa's visits supervised by a court-appointed monitor, there was less chaos and more stability. Dylan began to thrive, excelling in school and soccer, his laughter slowly returning. One evening, as we played a card game at the kitchen table, he looked up at me and smiled. "I'm glad we're okay now, Dad," he said. "We're more than okay," I replied, ruffling his hair. "We're a team." Lisa continued her counseling and, to my surprise, began making genuine progress. During one of her supervised visits, she pulled me aside to talk. "I know I've lost a lot," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm not going to stop trying to make things right, for Dylan and for myself." I nodded, keeping my response neutral. "That's all I want, for you to do what's best for him." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward letting go of the anger I'd carried for so long. Months later, as I stood on the sidelines at one of Dylan's soccer games, I realized how far we'd come. The betrayals, the heartbreak, the chaos, it had all felt insurmountable at the time. But we had survived. I had learned to be stronger, to set boundaries, and to rebuild. And most importantly, I had learned to put Dylan's happiness above everything else. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. To anyone reading this who's been through betrayal or heartbreak, let me ask, how do you find the strength to move forward? Have you ever truly forgiven someone who hurt you? Or is letting go enough?